23andMe, UnitedHealthcare. These are two major or big companies in the US that were hacked recently. 23andMe is a company that delivers genetic tests to consumers so they can track their DNA and ancestry. UnitedHealthcare is one of the companies that provide insurance in the United States. This company values are in the billions, but 23andMe especially lost more than 90% of its stock price. If you don't believe me, go and check their stock price. So the question is, how these two major companies that are worth billions of dollars were hacked? How patient and customer related information were accessed by hackers? To better understand this, today we are hosting Justin Beals. He's the CEO of Strikegraph. We're going to break down both incidents and we're going to explain what health tech companies can do to better protect patient-related data and information. So without further ado, let's jump in. Justin, it's so great to have you second time here on the show.
Thanks, Rupin. Glad to say hello again, of course, and excited about our chat today.
Yeah, I'm very excited too. Like security is something that we should not underestimate, especially in this day and age. Like most of our information is out there, and like the one that you don't want them to be out there is like anything related to your health, because like sometimes this information can be used against you, as we will see today. But today I want to talk about two important security bridges in the health tech space, and we will dissect those lessons for our listeners, especially for health tech startup founders, to understand how this huge multi-billion companies had security breaches that really affected the value and the customer trust in the company itself. All right, so without further ado, why we don't start? And let's start by UnitedHealthcare data breach. Can you just give me an overview about what happened here?
Yeah, happy to, kind of describe the breach a little bit. I have a little background information for us to review. So your listeners are probably very aware about what UnitedHealthcare does, but in detail, UHG is a health insurance company with a presence across all of the 50 US states. The organization is the world's largest healthcare company by revenue, 324 billion in 2022, and they employ 440,000 people worldwide.
Oh, wow.
So what we know is that one of its subsidiaries, Optum Solutions, they have a software platform called Change Healthcare. And it's the largest payment exchange platform between doctors, pharmacies, healthcare providers, and patients in the US healthcare system. So on Wednesday, February 21st, UnitedHealth Group filed a report with the US Security and Exchange Commission. And the report stated that UHG had identified a suspected cybersecurity threat actor, that threat actor had gained access to the Change Healthcare information technology systems. I think initially back in February, UHG felt that it was isolated to just the impacted systems. And they also stated that the incident is specific to that Change Healthcare software, and then the other systems across the company were operational. And then the other piece of information that we got was that on February 29th, the Optum subsidiary confirmed that they were experiencing a cybersecurity issue perpetrated by a cybercrime threat actor who was represented to them as Alpha Black Cat. So that's the name of the threat actor that was perpetrating the hack. Yeah.
Okay. And like, do you know on an average, like how many people were affected by this breach?
Yeah. And one thing we might talk about is like this breach is ongoing, right? As a matter of fact, breaches can last, for weeks and weeks, if not years and years. And so there is a little bit of a, fog of war situation. So the data we have today will not be as clarifying as the data we might have 6 months from now. But what we're able to assess from an impact perspective is that this is very broad. So remember that Change Healthcare platform, it's the #1 transaction processor for healthcare in the United States. And so while I might not have a count of the number of people affected, we know, for example, that the TRICARE system, so the VA hospital system, had to process all of their prescriptions by paper. They moved off of digital systems entirely. And so when this particular change transaction system went down or was turned off because it had suffered a significant breach, it affected almost all aspects of the United States healthcare system, from how prescriptions were processed. And I think that was the most visible because anyone that was trying to fulfill a prescription at a minimum got huge delays because we had to go back to paper methodologies to fill prescriptions. So you can imagine that it's probably affected, you know, tens of millions, if not possibly hundreds of millions of patients in the system. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not only like the patients, the entire working system. I was working in a hospital who had like similar breach, and like it was nightmare. As physicians, we were like doing paper chart, writing on papers, and that lasted for 2, 3 months. And then uh, after that, like after they were able to figure out the situation, and we went back to electronic medical records, like physicians were asked to upload previous documents from 2, 3 months or notes from 2, 3 months, which like it was a chaos. Like it goes beyond patients, and like it's the entire system.
Yeah.
And do you have an idea like what kind of informations like were stolen? We are talking about non-prescription, but we're talking about payment. Like, is it like name, age, gender, more than that, medical notes, credit card information?
This is an assumption presently, but I think it's all of the above. So
Oh,
any
wow.
data that was stored digitally on that Change Healthcare platform was probably exfiltrated. And exfiltrate means that they were able to take that data out of that system, the hackers were, and store it in their own system. Latest information on this hack is that they were able to retrieve 6 terabytes of data
Oh
out
my
of Change
God.
Healthcare, the hackers were, and that they have been ransoming that data back to UnitedHealthcare Group.
So they stole it and now they're selling it back to UnitedHealthcare?
That's right. And that's one of the real motivations for hackers these
Hmm.
days, right? You have to understand that hackers or threat actors broadly, they're motivated by a financial outcome. There used to be a day when these were very like nation state, like an enemy of the United States might want to hack a system. But today it's such a lucrative effort that we see these organizations like a Lockbit or an Alpha Black Hat essentially as a standalone business themselves, operating as a company. So they will either install ransomware, which essentially encrypts all your data and you're unable to decrypt it. So you lose access to that information. And then they will expect a payment to receive a key so that you can do the decryption, or they will take the data entirely. And for a payment, they will erase the data that they took. This is really kind of the most recent information. So I want to again highlight that this could change, but it seems that about 6 terabytes of data, personal information, data about pharmacies, I mean, whatever Change Healthcare was storing could be included in that data, was taken. And there is some reporting that already over $20 million worth of payments have been made to this hacker group. Yeah.
This is mind-blowing. So like, isn't there a way like, don't they get caught? Like,
Yeah.
depending on where they deposit the money or like where the person is accessing the internet, like, isn't isn't there a way in this day and age to figure out who did it?
That's a great question. I was recently talking with a colleague in this security space, and one of the myths I think we need to bust is that the threat actors get caught. They rarely ever get caught. You will rarely ever get your money back, if ever. And while we're able to see the transaction that happened, the reason we can see the transaction is that it was transacted over the Bitcoin network. So the way the ransom was received was essentially by the transfer of Bitcoin into the hacker's accounts. Bitcoin runs a public ledger, right? So you can see in the ledger where things were transferred, but where those funds wind up, you have very little control over what happens to it next. And especially if they're operating in a country like Russia, then it will be hard to do anything to the owners of those Bitcoin wallets. So one thing to understand about the marketplace, the business of ransomware and hacks, is that it's quite lucrative and that there are the ability to push money through systems like cryptocurrency to the threat actor themselves for payment. And so they have a way to receive those funds without much of a fear of reprisal. Yeah.
Wow, that's mind blowing. So it's part of it is also scary, like big organization that owns billions of dollars now paying money back to people sitting God nowhere like in this world, right? And like just thinking about it, what were like the system weaknesses or like what was the problem in the system that enabled those hackers to get into all this data?
Yeah. We don't yet have enough information about UnitedHealth Group specifically, this particular breach on what happened, but we can talk about typically how these things are perpetrated. Usually, the softest target for a major breach is through social engineering or essentially getting other humans to give you information. And we have to understand that the threat actors that are perpetrating these crimes are incredibly patient. They can take years to learn about an organization like UnitedHealth Group, slowly collecting information about how those systems work, even getting access, but not yet perpetrating a crime so that they can learn more and more about how those systems work. Then, in a moment of their choosing, they flip the switch, turn on the encryption or exfiltrate the data. So if you're able to, for example, get a consumer of UnitedHealth Group to give you access to their account, or a worker inside a UnitedHealthcare group, especially if you're incredibly targeted, you can learn a lot about those systems and you can find a way to gain entrance into secure areas.
And can you explain like a bit for those listening who don't know what social engineering means? Like, what is social
Yeah.
engineering?
Yeah. A very typical one that we're all used to is getting an email that looks like it came from your bank and asks you to click on something. Or I get a text message. I get them all the time now. It's
Yeah,
really
me too.
annoying. Yeah. It's like,
Don't open
hey,
links on
that's
LinkedIn.
right. And so that's a very easy way to perpetrate a social engineering type of hack. And they get more complex over time. You know, maybe the next tier of complexity is I have staff on my team that, especially after they change their LinkedIn profile, they'll get an SMS message trying to pretend like it's coming from me, asking them to do something. And so that's another type of social engineering. But you can see that the threat actor had to learn something about that person, something about our company and who I am, and then attempt to get that person to click on a link or to open up something so that they have access to our systems. But it can also happen in physical environments where you convince the security guard to let you in the door, or you're in a lounge area where people are taking a break and you've shown up at that lounge area repeatedly over time, and then just say, "Oh, I forgot my pass card. You know, would you let me in?" And of course, at that point, you or I, very trusting individuals, would think, "Oh, sure, this is a coworker. They're here all the time," and we would let them in. I think broadly for all of us as individuals, we really need to be aware that this danger always exists. And the best advice that I've gotten on mitigating social engineering is to really take a pause when you get an ask to provide some access or some information. Just take 10 seconds and think about it for a second. Who's asking? What are they asking for? Why do you trust it? What's valuable about it? Our tendency is to just say yes. We're social creatures. We want to work well in social environments. We'll want to say yes. And if we just take a couple of seconds to think about what we're saying yes to, a lot of times we'll halt the attack. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, we do lots of training now at work, and I work in different organizations, and they all send us those mandatory training. I received one today, like it's called InfoSec training, where they have like this small videos, 3 to 5 minutes. In a funny way, they try to teach you what are the different ways of social engineering and how hackers can gain access to your organization. And it's very scary. Sometimes, like now, I'm very hesitant to click on any email that doesn't look familiar. It's not something
Yeah.
you underestimate.
Yeah. I don't click on a lot of emails. I don't look for emails with links in them too often. And I think as companies, we should probably start to prioritize more secure communication channels. A great example is like we use a chat system like Slack,
Mhm.
and any user that's in that system had to log in somewhere. That gives me a little better confidence that I know who I'm talking to.
Gotcha. And so this happened in United Healthcare. What did they do like in return? What measures did they take, and what are they doing right now for their systems?
Yeah, first thing that almost everyone does is that they'll have a security incident response policy that
Mhm.
dictates a process. And UnitedHealthcare Group is a very smart group of people. This breach is really something that can happen to any organization. And I
Mhm.
know that their security teams are smart and working hard to resolve the problem. So we just want to say that that this is just something that happens to companies and that they've probably, you know, battle tested plans for how to respond. It seems like the first thing that happened was that they took down the Change Healthcare platform. So
Mhm.
they shut it down. That
Mhm.
way, whatever access to whatever systems the threat actor had gained, they might be able to cut off access to other systems so it couldn't infect other people. And we
Mhm.
actually saw one of the responses being that other organizations were disconnecting from United Healthcare Group, like the American Hospital Association had recommended disconnecting your systems from Change Healthcare. They will then go in and clean essentially the servers. And so they will want to clean all access, review all access, reinstall operating systems, reinstall the actual software, and then turn those systems back on. And I think that's the 2 week period where we saw the system down completely or
Mhm.
unaccessible, where we had to go back to paperwork. They were probably in the midst of performing that effort and then checking to make sure that it was fully cleaned. But because the data was taken, we know some amount of data was taken. The retrieving that data or dealing with that data and the relationship with the threat actor, that's what's going to continue on for quite some time. Yeah.
Gotcha. Um, I think I don't know if we can answer this together. Um, But from your feeling and your understanding, I'm sure you've seen this before. Like, how do you think customers or patients are going to trust United Healthcare or like other companies that are part of United Healthcare? Do you see that this is something can be fixed, or now it's very hard to gain customers or patient trust again?
Well, I think broadly, gaining back patient trust will be difficult entirely. You
Yeah.
know, trust is a habit. It's something
Hmm.
we cultivate over time, as in any situation, whether it's just an individual relationship between you and me or a relationship with a brand. We need to prove that we can be trustworthy over time, especially when some issue will have happened. Um, you know, we may say that where United Healthcare is concerned, healthcare group, they're in a little bit of that too big to fail status, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is something that broadly the medical industry needs to think about. Should we be running so many of our transactions on a single platform? Is the aspect of really large players that are easy targets really an issue, and we need a more resilient infrastructure where we can switch to other providers And should we, as a community, be buying from not the biggest all the time? Like, is there a choice where a hospital system decides that they want to work in a more resilient fashion and not go with the single largest provider in the marketplace?
Gotcha. I want to switch gears now a bit more about a company that I think all of us also know, 23andMe, and a
Yeah.
lot of people tested their genes through 23andMe. Also, it's another company that lost billions of its worth. Now thinking about it, I think their value came mainly from their data. But I will leave this to you. So can you just, for the listeners, explain what happened to 23andMe and what kind of data got lost from them?
Yeah. So a little background on 23andMe. 23andMe started out collecting and testing DNA.
Mhm.
I was an early adopter a long, long time ago. I'm incredibly interested in history. It's
Yeah.
something that I find interesting. And 23andMe was one of the first, I think, consumer available
Hmm.
products where you could get your DNA sequenced, and they
Hmm.
would measure that sequencing against DNA throughout history that
Hmm.
had maybe been collected anthropologically or archaeologically.
Hmm.
Um, and it gave you an interesting roadmap of where your DNA sequence traveled over time. I found it really interesting. Lots of people submitted DNA to 23andMe for sequencing over the years, one of the largest in the world. And they started moving into areas where they would test DNA for a predilection for perhaps a disease or certain other health issues. So, just a little bit about the breach. On October 3rd, information came to light that someone was attempting to sell data um, uh, uh, from 23andMe. Essentially, the DNA records are information about people that had accounts on 23andMe for between $1 and $10 per record.
Oh,
And this was offered for sale on the dark web. So there are auction sites where you can go and buy data that was stolen from other systems. Um, the data that was offered for sale included the display name of the person, the gender of the person, the birth year of the person, details about their genetic ancestry results, like broadly European or broadly Arabian. And it also could include some more specific geographic ancestry data. The hack was perpetrated by using what is called credential stuffing. And so the way credential stuffing happens is, let's say that another product gets hacked and a bunch of usernames and passwords are pulled out of that product. You might then go to a wholly other product and be like, let me try this same username and password on that product.
oh,
And
wow.
that's credential stuffing. Um, I think that the interesting thing about 23andMe is that it's a data ontology, right, Rupin? They have my DNA sequence, and then
Yeah.
they associate that sequence against their population of other DNA sequences. So when you're just, let's say you gain access to my account, you also might learn something about a whole lot of other people that are my relatives on some level, because we share a match from a DNA perspective. And so that allowed them with just a few accounts to gather a lot of data because it's exponentially connected. Yeah,
This is crazy. And it's unbelievable now. Like, so I think for those listeners, I think this is a great lesson. Never have the same password for two websites.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Like,
You can't. I've had to look. I want to own. I did it a long time ago myself, when early days of the internet. But I have a unique password for every system I log into. Yeah,
and just I want to maybe take a curve here. So do you use passwords mainly to log into different websites? I know there are like some keys or USB keys, and there are different ways of accessing different or like websites. Like, do you mainly rely on passwords and typing and your memory or another way to organize passwords?
yeah. I certainly some systems I just use username and password for, but
Mhm.
I've been advised by smarter security professionals than me that passwords are too weak anymore. and that you should use multi-factor authentication. So that would be a key style access, or you receive a special code on a device,
Hmm.
and that allows you to log the rest of the way in, especially anything that's sensitive, like your bank account.
Hmm.
Um, for certain administrative systems, I'll definitely require multi-factor authentication. And I think organizations broadly, for whatever the pain point, should use multi-factor authentication for their systems. For anyone logging in to access patient healthcare information, I realize it's an extra field. It's a bit of a pain point to have to do it, but we just feel like passwords are not the security that they used to be.
Yeah. And maybe I misread this, but 23andMe did not have two-step verification, right? Or maybe they had that as an optional
Um,
when
I,
logging in.
I can't remember if they offer it, but most users don't use multi-factor authentication. And also, most people created accounts like I did a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
So, and 23andMe did not force updates to passwords or shutter accounts that hadn't been logged into for a while. And so they leave that door open over time, right? It becomes more and more brittle, a security posture as time goes on. The impact was large. It seems that the hackers were able to steal 6.9 million records out of 23andMe. So even being able to access 10,000 accounts, the amount of data they were able to pull out of that system was sizable.
And are the hackers like trying to sell it back to 23andMe like UnitedHealthcare, or are they now selling it mainly on the dark web?
They're selling it on the dark web as far as we can tell. One interesting thing about this hack, or the data that was pulled, is that, and this is what initially got the 23andMe issue into the news quite a bit, is that the hackers seem to be really focused on releasing information about Azerbaijani Jews.
Hmm.
So on the dark web, they were publishing that they had a list or a lot of Azerbaijani Jews. And this is new to the DNA issue, right, Rupin? With that DNA data, that ancestry data, you can bring forward very private information, and especially in certain geographies, a knowledge about your historical background, your ancestry can be a danger to you. And so we saw this interestingly in the 23andMe hack.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. It's not only that. I think uh, because like it's known to me, at least in my field, there are some genetic diseases that run in specific population, and Jewish people, Spanish people, are like Asian people are like unique populations where like we already know that there are some genetic information that runs through this population, and this population is high risk of developing certain diseases. But now you have so much data on that population level. It's just like mind blowing. It's crazy. Now you don't know the individual. No, no, like you know the entire population.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and with the computing power that we have today, understanding even three or four pieces of information about an individual allows you to create really dangerous campaigns against those people.
Mhm.
If someone knew three or four things about me and they attempted a phishing attempt, might be just enough information for me to feel like they really do know me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And also for those people like who never seen 23andMe stocks, please search 23andMe stock and you're just gonna see a huge drop, which is like it's sad. It makes you feel sad. The company lost its all value after this. Um, Going back to so what did 23andMe do now? Like I know they are facing at least three dozens of trials and like lawsuits, but like are they
Yeah.
trying to retrieve, buy back, install? Like what's going on with them?
Yeah, it's a little tough to buy back the data because the threat actor can simply duplicate the data and resell it. So as they get a fee, I think there's a risk that even if you pay for it, it's not fully gone, right? Like
Yeah, fair enough.
there's still the opportunity to sell it. Certainly, 23andMe, they did have a letter from their legal counsel, and they said that 23andMe believes that unauthorized actors managed to access certain user accounts in instances where users recycled their own login credentials. That is, users used the same usernames and passwords used on 23andMe as on other websites. Um, I think that I'm not sure. I want to give credit. 23andMe is a big group. There's lots of different people in there. But one thing that I might have a criticism for is certainly you could expect your users to renew their passwords or review their passwords. But definitely, as a chief technology officer, I know that I can force the issue. Now, I get the business impact. People might not be able to log in. You might have to close those accounts. There might be some some
Yeah.
issue on the business side. But was it worth it at the end of the day, right, Rupen, to experience this level of hack, the costs that might have come with it, the reputational issues, to not say, hey, we have less users log in, or we've put some extra steps in the process of logging in, and that lost us some of our user traffic. I think you give up the user traffic group, and that would be my recommendation. Yeah.
No, for sure. Um, Now, if we want to like summarize 23andMe and United Healthcare for those listeners, especially in the health tech space where data is money, data is your value. Um, what lessons can we give them? What should we learn from those big companies and not do, and how we can not replicate their mistakes?
Yeah. I think for UnitedHealthcare was still learning a little bit about how the attack was perpetrated, but I would recommend for any organization to just recognize how soft a target area your people are and how important it is to give them the tools to really successfully not click on that link in an email, not be the subject of a social engineering type of attack. And I think for UnitedHealthcare Group, that might be where we find out that the attack was initially perpetrated. It could be something else, but as an organization, it's something that you really need to focus on. Cybersecurity is a much harder surface area to penetrate. We know a lot about encryption. We know a lot about firewalls. We know a lot about appropriate server patching and methodologies, but humans are a softer target, and so we need to be careful of that. For 23andMe, my recommendation, what we should learn is, first off, don't use the same password for multiple systems. And if you have some old accounts that are very old, go in and update the password or close the account. Just, clean up the history there a little bit. And then secondly, I do highly recommend wherever possible, if at all possible, use multi-factor authentication. Even if someone gains a password and a username with multi-factor authentication, you should be able to beat an attack to that account.
Amazing. Justin, thank you so much. Like usual, this was amazing episodes, and like it is full with like pearls and advice, especially for people in the health tech space where data is literally what gives the company its value. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Rupen, of course.